So I was able to, maybe don't record yet.
All right, so this webinar is being recorded, and I'd like to welcome everyone out there and thank you for joining us. We've had, for those of you who have been on a little while, we were dealing with that little hiccup with Facebook Live, and we were not able to get this on Facebook Live tonight. But after tonight, it will be posted. The recording will be posted on the AARP Facebook page and also the AARP Alaska YouTube channel. And so we'll be providing more information to everybody so that you can make sure that you can watch it later if you didn't get a chance to, if you tried to get on Facebook tonight. I'd just like to welcome you all. My name is Linda Krueger, and I'm with the Juneau AARP Community Action Team. And I'd like to thank you for joining us tonight for part one of our series on carbon footprint, climate change, and sustainability. I'm the local lead here for AARP, and I'm here tonight with our co-sponsors for this series, Steve Benke and Anjali Grantham from the Juneau Commission on Sustainability. I'd like to start the evening by acknowledging that the City and Borough of Juneau is on lands of the Gleniti and Wishkitan of the Aquan and the Ushkitan of the Takuquan. These clans have been an integral part of the community's history, and because of their resilience, they continue to live on their land today. We're able to enjoy this beautiful place because of the wise stewardship practiced by the ancestors of these clans, and we're grateful for their continuing stewardship and care. Gunashish. And I'd also like to thank Lillian Petershore for her guidance and assistance with this acknowledgement. Gunashish, Lillian. For anyone unfamiliar with AARP, and I think that's kind of crazy, right? However, we did recently encounter someone who said, well, what's AARP? So for those who are wondering, AARP is the largest member organization in Alaska with over 75,000 members age 50 and older. The AARP mission is to enrich the quality of life and empower people to choose how they live as they age. With 38 million members nationwide, AARP advocates for and works to equip individuals to live their best life. And AARP believes strongly in principles of collective purpose, collective voice, and the collective power of people 50 years and older. So Dr. Carolyn Brown here in Juneau is part of the AARP CAT team, and she brought the idea of this series to our Juneau AARP team, and we all agreed that this was a good idea that fit with our mission. And with that, we contacted Juneau the Commission on Sustainability member, Steve Benke, who's here tonight. And he put us in touch with Anjali Grantham, who's also here tonight. And we were well on our way in partnering and parenting this series. Through this series, we hope to increase community engagement by presenting useful information and practical solutions that can be implemented at the community, family, and individual level. And we hope these sessions empower people to take action in whatever ways are appropriate and feasible. One of the AARP focus areas is livable communities, and addressing the challenges of climate change and taking meaningful individual and collective action to reduce carbon are part of making our community more livable. Collective action, as we will explore in our final session, is itself beneficial as the social connection has been found to promote health and increase hope. So the outline for tonight. Tonight we'll be hearing a few words from Assembly Member Carol Treem, who's joined us. And she's going to talk to us about the Assembly's sustainability and climate-related priorities. Then we'll be hearing from Steve Benke about the Commission on Sustainability. And then he'll turn it over to Anjali again, and she will dig into topics including carbon footprint, carbon sequestration, and local solutions to climate change. Then I'll be back to wrap up and explain the upcoming sessions and encourage you to join us again. Finally, before I turn the evening over to Anjali and Steve, I'd like to say thank you to both of them and our other presenters for help with planning and production of this series. Thanks to Carol Treem for joining us tonight, and thanks to AARP Station Director Teresa Holt, Associate State Director for Communication Katie Severin, and Daryl Royce, Associate State Director for Outreach, with all of their help and support for this event. Daryl is also here helping tonight with the Zoom and logistics, and I thank you all. And with that, Anjali and Steve, take it away, and I'll be back later.
Thanks, Linda. Hi, everyone. It's lovely to see all of you today, at least your names. And we're thrilled to kick off this series. We're going to be going through May, actually. So this is just the first opportunity for you to take part and learn about climate change solutions and all of the ways that you can engage in climate action here in Juneau and beyond. First, as Linda mentioned, we're going to have this program. You see that there's a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. So as questions arise, please type them in there. And those that are on the line will answer when as they're able as the program is going, but we're going to have time at the end really for questions and answers as well. So we have built time in for that. I'm now going to turn it over to Carol Treem, who is a member of the Juneau Assembly, City and Borough of Juneau, and also the liaison for the Juneau Commission on Sustainability, to say a few words. So thank you, Carol.
Thank you, Anjali. Thanks for having me here. I'm excited about this series. I am just going to briefly give an overview of what the Assembly's goals are as it relates to sustainability and climate change and the environment. A couple of years ago, we added a sustainability category to our goals, and those goals are set in our retreat every year in November, December. So the Assembly gets together and under a number of categories sets goals for what we hope to accomplish in the next year. And that helps the staff focus on what we're working on and hopefully helps remind us during the year too, what we've decided is important to work on. So in this last goal setting session that happened in December, in our sustainable communities category, we set goals for developing a zero waste plan, which is very important, especially as it pertains to the future of our landfill, which is something that's on everybody's mind on the Assembly. We also have a goal to measure, track, and reduce energy consumption. So this is starting small with CBJ facilities specifically. This is something that's kind of should be low-hanging fruit for us to be able to track how much energy the City and Borough of Juneau itself in its operations is consuming. We have this perennial goal under this category to be constantly working on implementing the Juneau Renewable Energy Strategy. So getting us, reducing our carbon footprint and getting us on renewable energy as much as possible throughout the borough. And this year also we have a goal to develop and work on a climate change adaptation plan, which is something I've been pushing for quite a while. So hopefully this year we can make some progress on that. And somewhat unrelated to those other goals, we do have a goal that is to work on the problem of junk cars in Juneau. So it's not necessarily climate related, but for us falls under that sustainable communities. And a lot of the work we do on these goals happens in the Public Works and Facilities Committee. So if you're interested in following what the Assembly is doing towards these goals, that committee is a good one to watch or look up the packets, because our Public Works Director, Katie Custer, does a really great job of tracking our progress on these specific goals, and they're in the agendas for the meeting. So if you're ever curious about what is happening, that's a good place to look. And then the Juneau Commission on Sustainability, of course, full of really dedicated and hardworking volunteers that they're really the body that's kind of pushing the Assembly forward and helping us to make progress on all of these goals. And we absolutely couldn't do it without them. So I think that's a great segue into Anjali and Steve. And I'm going to turn my video off and just listen to the rest.
Thanks, Carol. I'm going to pass it over to Steve, who's going to share a bit about what the Juneau Commission on Sustainability does.
Good evening. I'm Steve Benke. I'm chair of the Juneau Commission on Sustainability's Energy Committee, which is one of our standing committees. The Juneau Commission on Sustainability was created by the CBJ to advise them on community sustainability and help meet its commitment, quote, to a sustainable future that meets today's needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. And it's a 9-person group of community volunteers appointed by the Assembly. We meet monthly. Our meetings are advertised on the CBJ's website. What we do, we focus on outreach and communication with the public. So we conduct public informational sessions on various aspects of sustainability. And we're kind of counting this in that group of things. We helped develop the Juneau Climate Action Plan in 2010 and the Juneau Renewable Energy Strategy, which was adopted by the Assembly in 2018. And then since those plans were created, we've worked to help assist the CBJ in implementing them, including efforts that help individuals and businesses reduce their carbon footprint. So for example, we've worked to get public EV chargers installed to help it make it easier for people to get to use their electric vehicles. And we've helped develop and support the Alaska Heat Smart program that supports energy efficiency and heat pump installations for residents in Juneau. We've also helped CBJ staff develop successful grants for electric buses and are working on a grant for the to support dock electrification. Those are topics that are going to be discussed later on in session 3 on transportation. We're also working with CBJ staff and the Public Works Committee on a community zero waste plan, which I think will be touched on in session 4 about later on. And I also wanted to mention that although our session is focusing on Juneau, I'll mention that a number of other Alaska communities have similar groups. Fairbanks has a sustainability commission, recently began working on its climate action plan. The Kenai Peninsula Borough also recently created a group. They call it a Resilience and Security Commission, but it really focuses on a lot of the same topics. Similarly, Sitka, Homer has had a long-term community climate action plan, as does the community of Anchorage. For more information on JCOS and what we're up to, you can get to our webpage through the City and Borough Juneau's homepage. Thanks. I'll turn it back to you, Anjali.
Thanks, Steve. So there's a handful of core concepts that are a bit foundational to the webinar series that's forthcoming. I'm going to share a bit about these core concepts this evening, and I'm also going to talk about some of the policies that are in place in CBJ that guide a lot of the work of JCOS as well as the Assembly these days when it comes to climate action, some of which have already been mentioned, like the Juneau Renewable Energy Strategy. So I'm vice chair of the Juneau Commission on Sustainability. I'm also the outreach chair. I'm a public historian, and I'm kind of a catalyst for all sorts of arts and cultural projects around the state. I'm not a scientist, and I'm not a policy analyst. So you might be wondering why I'm actually here giving this presentation. So I'll tell you. And the reason I'm here is because of the summer of 2019. It was the last really sunny summer that we had in Juneau. And while in a way that's a way to celebrate, for me, it was a reason to be quite depressed. Days of sunshine also were accompanied by really pretty intense wildfire smoke, even though we didn't even have any fires. And right in Juneau, the smoke was still everywhere, so much so that my stepson got asthma. Soon after that, the ferry workers went on strike, and I realized how precarious our food supply was and our connection to the outside world. And I was able to kind of telescope that forward and think about what climate change meant for our food supply up here. At the same time, there were up north, it was so hot that salmon were actually having heart attacks in the streams because it was too hot for them. They were not used to this sort of heated habitat. I got really depressed by all of these things. And I felt like just my very act of living was contributing to the problem. You know, I'd get in my car and I'd create carbon emissions. I'd go to the store and I couldn't help but think about this supply chain that brought me the chicken or whatever, you know, and so it just felt really disempowering. So I was very depressed, but I did spend some time educating myself. And I realized that it didn't really do me any good to focus on the impacts of climate change when I was researching. That was not a way to make myself feel better. However, focusing on the solutions really did help. And I was able to do this research and understand that there were a lot of ways that I could contribute to solutions and my family could as well. And so we started to make some changes in our household and just our way of life. We expanded our garden. We started composting. I got an electric vehicle, a used Nissan Leaf, and I named her Hope, thinking about what Linda said about working together and how that helps to bring hope to our lives. I started using carbon offsets when I traveled, but most importantly, I'd say I joined the board of Renewable Juno and the Juno Commission on Sustainability, and I started to work and advance on community-wide solutions for climate change. I also wrote a newspaper series that focused on what climate change solutions make sense within Juno. And I was able to find a way to use my skills as a writer and someone who engages in interesting projects and to kind of help advance climate action in the community. So now here we are almost 3 years later, I'm still really worried about climate change, but I also feel hopeful and I also feel much better prepared. And I now know that I'm more a part of the solution than I am a part of the problem. So that's how we're hoping that you feel at the end of this series, armed with a lot of practical solutions and hope. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, slideshow from beginning. So carbon footprints, it's the title of the series, Carbon Footprints and Community in Juneau and Beyond. But what do we mean by this carbon footprint concept? Simple answer is a carbon footprint is really the greenhouse gas emissions that result from daily living. But rather than listening to me drone on about it, let's watch a video that does a really nice job of illustrating what carbon footprints are, how they're calculated, and talk about some of the solutions that are out there for reducing a carbon footprint. So I'm going to share a video.
If you haven't said. One resource that we use a lot of is carbon, mostly from the burning of fossil fuels. Now, this is a cute drawing, but truly, this is what fossil fuels extraction looks like nowadays. When we do that, it produces greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide. There are other greenhouse gases, but to keep it simple and easy to compare, we count it as CO2 equivalent. So part of our ecological footprint is actually our carbon footprint. It is the amount of CO2 equivalent that is released into the atmosphere as a result of our activities. In my case, about half my ecological footprint is carbon, and worldwide it is about 60%. We can also calculate the carbon footprint of the world, a country, a business, an individual, an event, a product, etc. For example, when we travel with a vehicle that burns fossil fuels, it clearly releases carbon into the atmosphere. If I use an electric vehicle, then the question is, how is the electricity produced? In the United States and China, for instance, the two countries with the largest carbon footprint, about 65% of the electricity is produced from fossil fuels. So there is a good chance that even an electric car generates a lot of carbon dioxide. But I'm already getting into how the carbon footprint is calculated. So how do we do that? Well, you're going to need a pen, a notebook, a calculator. No, I'm kidding. Calculating your carbon footprint is like many other things nowadays. There is a website for it. If you're in the US, I recommend this one. If you're in the UK, I recommend this one. If you are anywhere else, I recommend this one. Essentially, you enter how much energy it takes to heat your home, how much driving and flying you do, how much money you spend on food, clothes, technology, investments, etc. And the engine behind it translates everything into how many metric tons of carbon equivalent that is. Adding it all up at the end, you get your carbon footprint. Mine is 8.63. It is significantly lower than the average in Canada, where I live, but you can see that it is significantly higher than the world's average, and more importantly, to the worldwide target. Where does this target come from? The scientific community agrees that when we use fossil fuel, it releases greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, which makes its temperature rise. We have emitted so much of these greenhouse gases over the past century that the Earth is getting warmer than it has been over the past 400,000 years. We found that out by drilling ice cores in Antarctica, which is the topic of another video you can watch if you like. So we need to reduce our emissions, which means we need to reduce our carbon footprint. How do we do that? One option is carbon offsets. This means paying a certain amount of money depending on your emissions, that will go towards a program designed to reduce the same amount of carbon emissions somewhere else in the world, either by planting trees, building a wind farm, a solar power plant, etc. When you calculate your carbon footprint, some calculators will give you a link to offset your carbon emissions. If I choose this one, for instance, it would cost me less than $100 Canadian to offset my carbon emissions for the entire year. Great deal, right? But here is the rub. Planting trees does not make airplanes fly yet. So offsetting does not keep the fossil fuels, the carbon, in the ground. It just transfers the problem onto another project somewhere else in the world while we keep extracting them. In a way, it is like killing panda bears and donating to WWF to protect them. Carbon offsets should be seen as a great way to fund tree planting and renewable energy projects around the world in order to transition away from fossil fuels, not as a long-term solution. The best way to reduce my carbon footprint is to address its root causes, so the carbon is not extracted in the first place. I can live in a smaller home, improve its insulation, heat it with geothermal energy, for instance, use less electricity, have the electricity I use produced from renewable energy, walk and bike to drive less with my car. When I do drive, I use a very efficient vehicle, maybe an electric vehicle, given that the electricity is mostly hydro where I live, fly less, eat less meat, especially beef, which generates a lot of carbon emissions. And finally, one we don't talk about very often, be smart with my investments, meaning the money I give to financial institutions through my mortgage and insurance products. Why? Because most banking and finance organizations invest my money into fossil fuels. According to carbonfootprint.com, if I cut my mortgage, it would reduce my total annual carbon footprint by 2 metric tons, 20% of my total carbon footprint. Finally, according to the 2020 GAP report published by UNEP, the 10% part of the population that earns the most money have just about the same collective carbon footprint as the other 90%. So it is our entire system that is dysfunctional. And at the end of the day, the best way to reduce our carbon footprint is to take action and to vote for those who will help create the new systems that we need. If you calculated your carbon footprint as well and feel comfortable sharing it, please let me know in the comments below how much it is.
Linda, I believe, put a link in the chat to one of the carbon calculators that was referenced in that video. So you can go and check that out if you'd like to calculate your own carbon footprint. There are many others that are out there. I also want to mention at this point that we have a local carbon offset program, which is not akin to killing panda bears and donating to the World Wildlife Fund. It's the Juno Carbon Offset Fund, and it's run by the local nonprofit Renewable Juno. And with the Juno Carbon Offset Fund, your offsets go to purchase and install air source heat pumps in lower income family homes in Juneau. So air source heat pumps run off of renewable hydro power here in Juneau. So it is a way of directly reducing the emissions and our community's carbon footprint, while also addressing issues like income inequality and affordable housing in Juneau. So that is an option that I encourage all of you to look at if you haven't already. Several of the solutions that were mentioned in this video, we're going to dive into on a deeper level in the upcoming series, and all of them can help you to reduce your own carbon footprint. And while it's true that one person's actions isn't going to solve the climate crisis, when thousands of us take up these actions, we really do make measurable progress. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen so we can, oh, here we go. So you might be wondering about, what is our community's carbon footprint? And that actually, where do I advance my slide? That actually, we know what that is. And that is featured in the Juneau Climate Action and Implementation Plan. This is one of these foundational climate policies that CBJ has created. And I think, Linda, if you would put the link, if you haven't already, to the Juneau Climate Action and Implementation Plan in the chat. Here you can see Juneau's carbon footprint, that is our greenhouse gas emissions and our energy usage in 2007 and 2010, shown in metric tons of CO2 equivalent. So this data, staff and others went around and they were able to get information about all fuel and energy sales in Juneau. And they use that to create this energy profile that describes how we power our community. And oopsie, actually, pretend you didn't see that, because I want to do a poll to see if you are able to, if you know anything about how we power our community. So I'm going to launch this poll. It's kind of like a test question, actually. And please answer. And the question is, how much of Juneau's energy derives from an emissions-free renewable energy source? Is that 20%? Is it 65%? Or is it 98%?
I can't wait to see who the winner is.
I know. Okay, so the 63% of you believe it's 65%. I am sorry to report that the majority of you are wrong. The answer is 20%. We're thinking about all energy, not just electricity with that question. So I guess in a way it's like kind of a trick question. But here you can see our energy profile. Here you can see that looking at 2010, 75% of all of the energy that Juneau consumes. So we're talking not just electricity, we're talking about what we use to heat our homes, power our cars, all of that. So 75% of our energy was petroleum, and that resulted in 92% of the greenhouse gas emissions in Juneau. If you look down the line, uh-oh, where did that stop share? Okay, sorry. If you look down here, you can see electricity in 2010 was 20% of the energy that we consumed, and that resulted in 0% of our greenhouse gas emissions. That's because we are mostly run off of renewable hydropower in Juneau. So this is another super handy chart that is in the Juneau Climate Action and Implementation Plan. And this assigns our greenhouse gas emissions by sector. So here you can see on the left-hand side that transportation is responsible for most of our greenhouse gas emissions. 55% when you combine highway transportation, air transport, and marine transport. And I want to tell you this caveat about this data, that this data was only includes fuel that was purchased in Juneau. So this doesn't include airline fuel if they fueled up elsewhere, or barge or cruise ship fuel. So this is kind of underreporting in a way the marine and the air transport emissions. So with buildings, you can see that's responsible for 28% of Juneau's emissions. And that's mostly related to how we heat buildings in Juneau. That's the use of fuel oil boilers and furnaces. And this information is really helpful because it helps us to target emissions reductions efforts. And it becomes really clear that if we focus on transportation and building energy use, we can have some big community level wins. The Juneau Climate Action and Implementation Plan included a reduction target, and this goal was to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the community by 25% by 2032. And the plan includes 200 different actions related to emissions reductions. So it's a really handy report. So if I go back to the energy data here, you can see the super clear solution for reducing our carbon footprints and that of Juneau and really the world. And it comes in the form of electricity, especially renewable electricity that drives from a renewable source. If we ran everything on renewable powered electricity, our emissions would be practically nothing. So this brings me to another one of the key concepts you're going to hear about over and over and over again in the series, and it's beneficial electrification. Here's a definition that I pulled from the Environmental and Energy Study Institute. Beneficial electrification means replacing direct fossil fuel use with electricity in a way that reduces overall emissions and energy costs. I'm going to share another short video that talks about beneficial electrification. Not that video. This video.
Is going electric beneficial? When you hear about modern electrification, it's about swapping out one energy source, usually natural gas or other fossil fuels, for something that's powered by cleaner electricity. Switching to electric can reduce overall energy use with more efficient products, allow you to utilize a cheaper energy source, or both, potentially saving you thousands of dollars over the life of your investment. For example, electric vehicles cost about half as much to drive compared to gas-powered vehicles. Electric technologies can improve your quality of life by offering more precision, more stability, and additional safety features. And electrification better positions society to address climate change and greenhouse gas emissions by utilizing more low or no carbon energy sources. Our electricity grid is getting cleaner every day as more and more renewable energy replaces fossil fuels. By adding smart home technology, your transition to electrification can be even more efficient and affordable. As we push for a cleaner, more efficient tomorrow, beneficial electrification is helping to power our journey. To learn more about how and what you can electrify, visit whatissmartenergy.org.
Yeah, I'm gonna call it right now. I think I found the single biggest product.
The cost savings associated with electricity rather than using fossil fuels are really evident right now. We see what's happening with Russia and Ukraine, and the fact that Russia is this major supplier of fossil fuels for heating and other reasons around the world. So as the price of gas and everything else is going up, the price per kilowatt hour, if it's running, especially here locally, it's staying the same. So this is a really good moment for all sorts of reasons, cost savings, as well as politically, to electrify transportation and heating sources and all of that. So you're going to hear a lot about beneficial electrification, especially in the next webinar, which is about buildings and home, and then the one on transportation, which is following that. And beneficial electrification figures really prominently in the 2018 Juno Renewable Energy Strategy. And the Juno Renewable Energy Strategy, or the JRES, drives a lot of the work of the Juneau Commission on Sustainability these days, as well as the Assembly's sustainability goals. So I have a question for you about the JRES. If we meet the Juneau Renewable Energy Strategy goal, how much of our power will derive from a renewable source in 2045? Is that 100%, 80%, or 65%?
While people are
Everyone's
answering, I'll just say that I did put that link in the chat box. So there are links for the Juneau Carbon Offset Fund, for the Juneau Climate Action and Implementation Plan, and also for the Juneau Renewable Energy Strategy. So all of those links are in the chat for folks who are interested. Do we have a winner yet?
Well, we do. And the winner is the correct answer, 80%. Though I have to say, I really like the aspirations of those of you who said 100%. I'm all about that as well. So I'm going to share my slides again. Actually, I don't know if that's shared. Share screen. Okay, now it should be shared. Oops. There we are. So Juneau Renewable Energy Strategy, another thing that I believe is in the chat. The goal that is articulated in that is that 80% of all of our energy is going to come from a renewable source by 2045. So recall that back in 2011, around 20% of our energy came from a renewable source. So the question is, how are we going to boost that number to 80%? And the Juneau Renewable Energy Strategy has all sorts of pathways for us to do so. The general strategy is to reduce and transform energy use. So thinking about energy conservation, increasing the use of renewable energy, which is again through beneficial electrification, and also increasing the supply of renewable energy so that we know we have the energy that we need to get us to that 80% goal. So now that I've shared a bit about the local government policies that relate to Juneau's carbon footprint, let's hear from some of our friends and neighbors about some of the ways that they're working to lower their climate footprints.
What's up, guys, gals, and everyone in between? Noah here, and it is still a climate emergency. Here is what we're doing in Juneau to fight it. How about you, Brian?
I ride my bike to work because it doesn't burn gasoline and all of the added health benefits.
Oh, and growing my own vegetable garden, and also making sure I buy more locally caught seafood. How about you, Lisa?
Food scraps and yard debris in the landfill makes methane. Composting turns waste into wealth for people and the planet.
A heat pump is a great way to reduce your carbon footprint and save money. The average Juneau household can save $900 a year and reduce their CO2 emissions by 10,000 pounds a year.
There are a lot of individual actions that you can take. I'm choosing to take this time out of my day to write my legislators, requesting that they support science-based climate policy. How about you, Noah?
Thank you, Juno, but to make this work, we need big structural policy change. We need to stop subsidizing fossil fuels and invest in renewable energy. This summer, I want you to register to vote, get your friends to vote, and vote climate.
So thank you to our friends at 350 Juneau for making that lovely video showing some of the local climate change solutions. You maybe noticed that many of the solutions that we've talked about have focused on emissions reductions. And while that is absolutely essential, it's only part of the equations. So the net zero is one of these other foundational concepts to think about. And we need to reduce carbon emissions and remove greenhouse gas emissions from the atmosphere to reach net zero, which is when, as you can see right here, it's a counterbalancing of the human created emissions with carbon capture and carbon sequestration. Scientists and companies are trying to create new ways all the time for there to be better carbon capture. But in the end, the most effective carbon sequestration technology is the Earth itself. We really need to conserve the ecosystems that we have that sustain our climate. And we need to restore the degraded landscapes that are no longer capturing carbon like they can. You know, I'm talking about forests and grasslands and wetlands and peat bogs, muskegs, kelp beds. All of these are natural carbon sequestration systems. And while this webinar and the other ones mostly are focusing on reducing our emissions rather than on carbon sequestration, the truth is that one of Juneau's greatest contributions to climate action in the world is preserving the wetlands and the forests and tending to the healthy ecosystem, which is Linkit-Ani. So I'm hoping in this just short presentation that you can see that the global campaign to reduce the impacts of climate change and heal the planet and build the resiliency of our community takes on many guises, and it appears in almost pretty much every single sector. So here are photos of some of our other neighbors who are engaged in climate action. Climate action is Duff Mitchell going out and rallying community support to get electric buses for Capital Transit. It's Vivian Mork teaching us how to gather local plants in a responsible manner. Climate action is Devin Kibbe helping us to install EV charging stations here and elsewhere in the state. It's President Richard Peterson from Tlingit and Haida creating new Indigenous Guardians programs so that there's greater tribal sovereignty over related to forest management. It's also Bob Varness who designs electric boats. It's Lisa Doherty, who we saw before, composting, and Andy Romanoff, who boosts air source heat pumps. It's Alan Wilson, who insulates buildings. Sarah Lewis, who teaches us how to reduce food waste and to prepare for emergencies. And it's also Corin Bosworth, who works to preserve wetlands and peatlands, which are fabulous at carbon sequestration. Here are some of the logos of just a handful of the many more organizations and businesses that are engaged in climate action in their own way in Juneau. So I'm hoping that you can see how topics as disparate as health and as wetlands conservation and kelp farming and transportation and home heating and manufacturing and political organizing and tribal sovereignty all are connected under this broad mantle of climate action. So I think back to the summer of 2019 when I was forlorn about climate change and about my carbon footprint. And I wish that I would have told myself then, I could tell myself then, that there is an antidote to a carbon footprint. And in fact, I believe that the opposite of a carbon footprint is all of our work that goes towards achieving net zero. So the opposite of a carbon footprint is climate action. I'm going to pass it back to Linda now, who'll share a bit about our upcoming webinars, all of which are geared at arming you with climate solutions so that you too can be further engaged in climate action. You there, Linda?
Here I am. I'm still here. That was wonderful, Angeli. Thank you. I've learned so much. And what I'd like to say, we didn't have any questions come in the Q&A at the bottom. A couple people had some questions they put in the chat box, and I'm hoping they got answered. Carolyn, I hope your answer was there. And I also put all the various links into all the plans and the different things that Anjali talked about. But if you have a question for anybody tonight, put it in that Q&A box in the bottom, and we'll have time to answer your questions. And that would be great. So thank you to Carol, Anjali, Steve. I've just learned a lot tonight. This has been really great. And lucky for us, this is just the lead act. The remaining 4 sessions include Steve returning in 2 weeks on March 23rd for Green Home, reducing the carbon footprint of buildings while saving money. And who doesn't like to save money? I'm excited about that one. Then join us in 4 weeks, so 2 weeks after that, on April 6th. It's hard to believe April is coming so soon, but it is. On April 6th, Duff Mitchell will be helping us explore getting around with good transportation as a climate solution. And he'll be talking about electric vehicles. He'll be talking about walking and biking and trails around Juneau and how that helps out with our climate, reducing climate change. Session number 4 will happen on April 20th. That will focus on grub and garbage. I think Steve's been helping plan that one. Reducing the footprint of food and waste, and discussing community gardens, recycling, and composting. Maybe we should go visit Steve's house. I think Steve's house is the demonstration project for all of those things. Finally, we'll wrap up the series with a session on building resiliency. We probably all recognize that climate change affects us physically, mentally, and emotionally. It's been, research has shown that it has a really, really big impact on children and youth, as well as older people and people who just see the change around them and become really stressed out about it. I mean, it's just like, what can I do? And helpless. And we're hoping that through this series, you'll become less more optimistic, I'll put it that way, and with ideas of what you can do, what we all can do to stay healthy and build community during times of anxiety-inducing change, and have real live examples of things that we can do to take action that can make us, empower us each a little bit more. So if you have any questions on the final panel is going to be a little bit different. Most of the panels are local Juneau people that you probably know of or know. The last panel is going to include people from the East Coast, people who have been involved in the National Climate Plan. And so they're gonna, since it's really early, or it's really late back there when we're broadcasting this, I'm going to tape that a week early. And so what I'd like to ask you to do is, if you have any questions about health impacts and suggestions for staying healthy, if you would submit your question to me in advance at my email address, which is Linda, L-I-N-D-A, Laska, L-I-N-D-A, L-A-S-K-A 2003 at gmail.com. And I'll write that in the chat for you. And then just send me your question and I'll pass it along to our 2 panelists. And then we'll broadcast that on May 4th, the final Wednesday of this series. Again, I'd like to say thank you to all of the presenters and organizers who have been with us tonight. Carol's still around, I think. Maybe she'll be here. Maybe she has some questions to ask Anjali and Steve. And we have time for Q&A. And I don't know if any more. No, I don't see anything in the chat box or anything more in the Q&A. So how about our panelists? Any questions for each other? I don't know, Anjali, I should have thought of a question to ask you. How often do you meet your group?
Juneau Commission on Sustainability, we have each month we have a work session and we have a regular meeting, and they're Wednesdays at noon.
All right, great. And are those like on Zoom? Like, can people listen in and participate and ask questions and those kinds of things?
Yes, they're via Zoom still, and there's always an opportunity in the agenda for public participation.
Terrific. Hey, we've got a question. What's the most important thing a person can do to reduce their own carbon footprint? I think that's one that comes at the end of all of this whole series. Yeah, I think you have to decide among all the different, you have to watch every night just to get an idea of what you can do, right? Steve, what do you say?
Well, I think one of the things about energy use and greenhouse gas emissions is that there really are no silver bullets. There really, there's so many different contributors, but we're lucky that we live in Juneau. Those of us who live in Juneau are lucky because the closest thing to a silver bullet is the beneficial electrification that Angeli talked about, and the fact that we've got this clean hydropower. So anytime you can convert stuff that burns carbon and convert that to electricity use, you really make big headway. And so the two big ways to do that are replace your oil burner with a heat pump, because that takes out a big chunk right away of carbon, or replace your gas burner with an electric vehicle, because that does the same thing. And those each kind of based on some of the numbers that we've looked at, those are sort of equivalent. So if you can basically figure on average, you're going to take 5 tons of carbon out of the atmosphere, or reduce your own carbon footprint by 5 tons per year by using a heat pump or by using an electric vehicle.
So I think we're all sold on that. I think all of us, I'm pretty sure Carol has an electric vehicle. I think all of us have electric vehicles, and I'm installing heat pumps both in my house and in my rental house this spring. So I'm converting to heat pumps and the electric car. I love the electric car, and I don't think I'll ever not have an electric car. So what is the carbon footprint if you have a cooking oil burning vehicle? Oh, Steve, any ideas?
Let's think about that. I kind of suspect that the person asking the question might have an answer to that. I guess, well, it probably depends on the source of the cooking oil. It depends on where it came from and how much carbon was created, how much carbon was burned to grow the plant that produced that cooking oil, and then getting the cooking oil shipped here. Good question. It's similar to the question about using biomass for heating or for other vehicles, because you grow something and it takes some carbon out of the air, and then you burn it and it puts some carbon back, but probably not as much back as it took out of the air initially.
I think we're going to table that question and bring it up again for the transportation, the evening that we focus on transportation, and we'll revisit that night. That's great. Thanks, though, Steve. So our next question is, how are the CBJ departments, project by project, ooh, this is technical, actually trying to implement the 2045 goal of decreasing carbon emissions and increasing renewable energy? And are any department heads directing staff on this important goal? I don't know, Carol, do you know the answer to that? It seems like that's an internal CBJ question.
I don't actually know the answer to that. Again, Katie Kester is the Public Works Director, and she's really been really great at spearheading our efforts on this. And I can ask her for some more details, but I don't have that answer off the top of my head.
We do know that there's some recent successes and some really exciting movement that's happening in CBJ. For example, they've started to really track energy use for facilities, which is really helpful for them to know how they can make improvements and energy conservation upgrades and all of that. There's also planning underway for how to expand EV charging infrastructure throughout Juneau. And there's also, there was this bond project, Juno voters, was it last year? Was it 2021 or 2020? We
2020.
voted for these energy efficiency improvement projects. And so that goes towards helping CBJ to reduce its own carbon footprint. So there's always more that can be done. And, but overall, I think CBJ has done a really good job of trying to advance climate action and reduce the carbon footprint of operations. Wouldn't you say, Steve?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we should give quite a bit of credit to Carol and her associates on the Assembly for making it a priority over the past couple of years. And so in the last couple of years, we've seen quite a bit more attention by CBJ department heads to these goals and these projects. And Carol actually mentioned and Angela, you mentioned the specific one of the CBJ looking at its own energy use and tracking that, which really just started basically about a year ago. And then of course the CBJ movement towards getting electric buses and for capital transit, and the project of moving towards dock electrification is another example of that. So we do have a number of good examples of departments heading in that direction, but they continue to need the support and encouragement of the Assembly.
It's great. Well, I think they're doing a great job. I'm happy to live in Juneau and really proud of what we've done. We had another question. As we think about the benefits, and this is, I don't know, well, hopefully one of you has some ideas. As we think about the benefits of electricity, how much electricity is produced using fossil fuels in Alaska and in the USA and globally? And we know there's not that much in Juneau. Most of ours is hydro, but what about, how does that compare with across Alaska and across the USA and globally?
Want me to take a stab, Angela?
I have no idea, so please.
Go, Steve.
I don't have the details at my fingertips, but certainly most electricity around the world and in the US for sure is produced by fossil fuels. I think that there's definitely been, there definitely are increasing amounts of renewable sources. And so in past decade, we've seen a increasing trend, solar, wind, hydropower, and in Alaska, I'll try to translate this. Alaska really is probably a good example of, I mean, most of the electricity in Alaska is produced by burning natural gas in the Anchorage area, quite a bit by burning oil, diesel for electrical generation. But the statistic that I find most fascinating about all of that is Alaskans spend about $5 to $6 billion a year on energy. So Alaskans as a whole spend about $5 to $6 billion on energy. Every year, we create a big bonfire with about $1 billion of those dollars are wasted because of our inefficient. So about 20% of that is just goes up in smoke, at least 20%. There's probably more than that really, but conservatively 20% is just burned because of inefficient vehicles or inefficient home heating. So picture that $1 billion bonfire every year that really could be substantially reduced by paying attention to little things and big things of improving energy efficiency.
Yeah, weatherizing your windows and your doors, and yeah, you're putting more insulation in your ceiling. And yeah, I was amazed when we winterized our house a few years ago and did all those kinds of things. And a lot of them are real pretty simple things. You just have to do it.
And those are the kinds of things, especially those home things, are the things we're going to talk about next at the next session.
Terrific. All right. Thanks, Steve. So how much does it reduce your carbon footprint if you hunt and fish for your protein, Angeli?
Well, in 2020, there was a biologist, I think it was a biologist, who actually did a study about this. Because, I mean, we know that, I say we, but in general, it is known that beef is really bad for the environment. It's because of land use, how we, demolish prairie, demolish rainforests, et cetera, to make more beef land. And then of course there's all of the inputs that go into the beef creation through all of the grain that it eats. And then there's the transportation. Anyways, all of this means that cows are really bad for the environment. And so they always say like, eat less meat. But here we are in Alaska, and a lot of us know that the deer that we eat does not have the carbon footprint than the prime rib that we got at our aunt's wedding or whatever, right? But it wasn't until in 2020 that they actually did some calculations to see what is the carbon footprint of hunting, more or less, right? And so what this scientist discovered is that if you are, it depends on how far you're traveling for how much meat, right? So I hate to use this as an example because my family goes to ADAC every year to caribou hunt. That maybe isn't the best way to procure meat and have a good positive carbon footprint. They say that according to this study, if you travel more than 78 kilometers per kilogram of meat, you're no longer getting that sort of carbon benefit of hunting. So the closer you are to the hunting grounds and the more that you harvest, the smaller the carbon footprint of what you're eating. And that's, so I mean, goodness, hook and line, catching salmon over at DiePack or whatever, it doesn't, as far as protein source goes, I don't think that it gets, I mean, if they were wild salmon instead of hatchery fish, maybe it would be a smaller footprint still. But yeah, it's definitely beneficial to eat local foods, and it does reduce your carbon footprint.
I have a story about that. I grew up on a homestead up in the Matanuska Valley, and my dad basically said that unless he could shoot the moose from his front porch, he wasn't interested. And so he would, and that's just about as good as you can get it in terms of a quantity of meat with minimal transportation or carbon costs. So that was how he viewed it.
Okay, here's another one. How scared should we be about the micro nuclear power that's being proposed in the legislature? Or should we be?
That sounds like a good topic of discussion. I think that I don't think there's been a whole lot of information out about what these new micronuclear plants look like and how much radiation they put out and what you do with the waste. At least I'm not familiar with the specifics of it. So maybe we better add that to our list of discussion points.
Right, good. Yeah. Is that what they're putting up on the military? Yeah, the military bases, they're installing, Department of Defense is installing those?
Yeah, and there's a proposal, there's actually money in the new federal infrastructure funding to, I think, to do some of those in some communities in Alaska.
Okay, all right, well, we'll keep that on the burner for future discussions. Let's see, what do we say? Okay, can you provide, Carolyn's looking for a few references to provide factual information about where we are now and where we need to go and how. Now, are those in some of the plans that we put the links in for, Angeli?
Yes, I mean, that's if the we is Juno.
Yeah.
Then we have that data. The data is outdated. It is from 2011. We being JCOS, also the assembly, are working to update that greenhouse gas emissions inventory and our energy use profile so that we can see the ways that like the bump in the number of EVs and air source heat pumps and all of that, how is that changing our fossil fuel use in the community? So there isn't anything that is, as far as the emissions inventory, that's recent, unfortunately, but that's something that we're hoping to change.
Okay.
But there's all sorts of, I mean, worldwide, there's, goodness, reams and, millions of pages written about climate change and how, our gigatons of emissions and all of that. Steve, do you have any reference that you would specifically recommend?
No, I don't, not off the top of my head. I don't, but you're certainly right. There's certainly reams and reams of information. Good topic for a Google search.
Yes, and I'd say though that one thing that I do recommend, it's not about, it's not going to really dive deep into the topic of like greenhouse gas emissions and all of that, but it is like the solutions focus, and that's Project Drawdown. And Drawdown looks at what are the things that currently exist that can help us to avert catastrophic climate change. And a lot of the solutions that they propose are ones that we're addressing in this webinar series. So Project Drawdown is something that I highly recommend anyone that's interested in this topic. It's a hopeful and an optimistic approach to climate change solutions, which clearly we're all about.
Great, yeah. I think unless another question comes in really quick, we've got one more. What shall we do with the plastics in our community? I think that's one that's going to come up when we talk about food and food waste, and because I think that's how we get a lot of our plastics, is their containers for food. But so we'll address that, I'm sure, in that section and maybe other sessions as well. But just really quickly, do either one of you have anything to say about plastics and reducing our plastics? It's a tough one.
Well, I can say that there's renewed focus on plastics legislation that puts the onus on producers instead of consumers. And that in the end is probably one of the best solutions out there, is to make it so that those that create the plastic have to manage the plastic waste as well.
Yeah.
We do have a fun little one, a small one that the Assembly is going to be considering. That there's a proposal to use some marine passenger fees to pay for refillable water bottle fountains on the docks, so that people can, instead of having to buy their water bottles and carry them around, they can refill their water bottles. So that's one nice little step that we can take. But it's like so many of these, there are no simple solutions to them. And I think Angeli has suggested the best one, which is reduce it at the source and figure out how to, just like whether it was the returnable glass bottles, and it really has to be a solution. The real solution has to start at that. And of course, there are whole new technologies being looked at for improving the plastics and making them more recyclable, or making them so that critters can eat them and so forth.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you mentioned that water refilling stations. That'll be terrific. I recently took a flight and all around the airport were water refilling stations. And I know Alaska Airlines is encouraging people to bring your own bottle and fill up your water bottle before you get on the airplane. And it's just so handy when you're in a place where it has all the different water stations, and you can just fill up your water bottle and take it with you. And we recently did a half marathon down south, and it was the same thing. They encourage you to bring your water bottle, and they had, of course, water available, but instead of handing you a cup, you just filled up your water at the water spigot that was there. And so everybody, you know, because a lot of people are carrying their own cups anyway, or their own water bottles. And so it was, again, another way to reduce waste and reduce that plastic, those plastic bottles, and, you know, and use something that's recyclable or reusable, I guess.
Mhm.
And I guess I think that's partly is it just encourage people to use things that are reusable.
And I think that's a good example of the whole issue of that this is not just a problem for us as individuals, that, you know, we each can do some things individually by reducing our carbon footprint, but we can really enhance that by having projects, community efforts that make it easier to do those things. So the water refill stations is an example of that. The public EV chargers is another kind of thing like that. That things that, you know, that are community priorities and community policies where we put a little bit of money into making it easier and creating some incentives for people to reduce their carbon footprint.
Right, for sure. Yeah. Well, I think we're out of questions that have been submitted. I don't have anything. So this is great. The discussion here at the end has been terrific, and I've learned so much. And I'm looking forward to the next time around, you know, in 2 weeks and learning even more. And Steve, we'll see you back. Do you have any teasers to encourage us to invite our friends?
Well, we're going to talk a lot about. We're going to try and follow from Angelique's good lead. We're going to talk about things that you can do simply, you know, for yourself. We're also going to talk about some of the programs that make it easier for everybody to do these things. And so we're going to be talking about some of our local programs like Alaska Heat Smart that makes it easier and to help figure out how to do a heat pump. Hope to have a couple, we're going to have a couple of experts available to talk about it, the kinds of things you can do to improve energy efficiency of your home, as well as these programs.
Terrific. Oh, I'm looking forward to it. That'll be great. So, and we'll be back on, and people can go to AARP Alaska and sign up for the next session if you haven't signed up yet. And there are posters all around town that also have a QR code, and you can click on that and takes you right to the sign up, and be sure and sign up. And hopefully by next time we'll have the Facebook Live thing worked out so that we can be live on Facebook. We'll see about that. And thank you, Daryl, for helping us tonight. And thank you, Steve and Angelique and Carol. This has been wonderful, and I'm excited to get moving into the whole rest of the series. This is terrific.
Me too. Thank you, Linda, and thank you, AARP, for coming and asking us to do this with you. It's been wonderful to collaborate on this.
This is great. And I'm glad Carolyn is out there. Carolyn Brown is out there because she's submitted a bunch of questions. And so thank you, Carolyn, for suggesting this and helping get us off the ground. It's terrific. And thank you for everyone out there who's been kind of playing along with us as the evening opened up. And I'm glad you could join us, and I hope you can join us again 2 weeks from now, and 2 weeks from that, and 2 weeks from that, and on for 4 more sessions. So we'll look forward to it. So thanks so much. Everybody have a good week. Good 2 weeks, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.